Hello, my name is C.R. Gibbs. I'm author, lecturer, and historian of the African diaspora. This month, this year, we're focusing on the African American family during Black History Month and for the rest of the year. And what I want to share with you today is my presentation entitled Strong Tower, the Black Family, Yesterday and Today. Thank you, and let's begin. We're looking at an African-American family just after the Civil War, when it seemed as though their horizons were limitless. But when we look at the pressure that has been placed on the African-American family, we must wonder how they were able to survive, how they were able to get over, and to order to understand how it is that an institution in our community that has been misunderstood, assaulted, and demeaned for 4 centuries has survived, we must take a look at its African beginnings. The family is the central institution of traditional African society. It is also the wellspring of culture, the source of identity, the origin of law, belief, and dignity, the keeper of traditions, the nursery of art and science, and the ultimate genesis of human social structure. We come from a society as Black people where we has always been better than me, and that feeling is undergirded with honor and obligation. A singular difference between the African family and most others is the elevated role of the female. In traditional African society, she is more than just a subset of man, more than a rib. She is the path of descent through which wealth, power, and privilege descend. In the creation myths of the Barozi, she is the opposite of the male, but also his equal. Among the Ijo of Nigeria, the very concept of divinity is female. In many creation myths, the female contends with the male for control. For example, among the Dogon, in their creation myth, it was said that women took down the stars to give to their children to play with. So automatically, we see that women have power in traditional African society that we don't see reflected in many other societies. We see that, as I said a moment ago, the family is the central institution of traditional African society. It is the source of identity. And we know that when compared to other societies, the importance of women cannot be overestimated. Even in traditional Egyptian society, women were equal with men before the law. They were entitled to attend court and participate in court as a plaintiff, defendant, or witnesses, and they were responsible for their own actions. They could own or rent property in their own right. We see that family is the centerpiece of traditional African society, and one of the best ways to prove this is taking a look at, well, if we took a look at African proverbs. In an African proverb, it is said that a family is like a forest. When you're outside, it is dense, but when you are inside, you see that each tree has its place. When we look at the structure of an African family, I mean, many of you will take a look at this compound house of the savannah, and you will see what? Wives' sleeping quarters, and there's more than one wives' quarters. You'll see a separate place for the husband, and you'll see the place for the children. But understand that in traditional African society, this was a society in which the old were esteemed beyond everyone else, that children had a special place. There were no jails, orphanages, and old folks' homes in the land that we came from. We were never in Africa what we have become since we have been here. There's an African proverb that says unity is strength, division is weakness, or it takes a village to raise a child. If relatives help each other, what evil can hurt them? This is the society that we come from, in which extended kinship networks undergirded and supported the very function of the family. And we see this reflected in the African American family today. But it would be tested like it never was during the period of American slavery. We see that men and women and children were sold like items of furniture, like household goods. And even in the area that we today call the DMV, enslavement, the slave trade, was a paramount source of economic power and wealth. Here we see one slave trading firm based in Alexandria, but shipping 68 men, women, and children to New Orleans. How could, and people wondered, the slave traders wondered, how could these stiff-necked Africans withstand what we had? But they just did not understand that one of our guiding principles could be expressed in the South African word Ubuntu. It's a term and a philosophy that literally means I am because you are. Ubuntu recognizes common humanity, oneness. A person is a person through other people. The idea of common unity is one of the building blocks of African society, helping to create an interlocking web of social responsibility. So although we recognize that the Black family has suffered much and is not perfect, the fact that it has survived and to an extent thrived is in part because of the blessings of those extended kinship networks, the idea that it's not nuclear, but it is communal in terms of its understanding. In other words, the Black family grew out of a complex combination of African traditions, Christian beliefs, and adjustments made to enslavement. In Africa, the family was a strong communal institution, stressing the leadership of males, the critical nature of females, the important children, and above all, extended kinship network. So you could call upon the elders to help you. Even at the same time that American society, where slavery was paramount, was reducing us to commodities, where no less a man than Thomas Jefferson promoted essentially slave breeding. We see, he says here, I consider a woman who brings a child every 2 years as more profitable than the best man of the farm. What she produces is an addition to the capital, while her labors disappear, his labors disappear in mere consumption. Black women were an especial target of the worst features of American slavery, where their bodies were not respected. Gender meant nothing to these beasts. But we are also edified and inspired by the fact that there was no struggle that seemed to be too large, no danger that seemed daunting. And in the case of the Underground Railroad, let me introduce you to another Harriet from the Eastern Shore. Brothers and sisters, take a look at Harriet Shepard. Born in Kent County, Maryland, just as you cross the Bay Bridge, about 56 miles outside of DC, 40 miles north of the Bay Bridge, this sister had enough of slavery's grief and escaped near Chestertown, Maryland, but she did not go by herself. No, this incredible Black woman saved most of her family. She was the mother of 5 girls and 2 boys, and in the fall of 1855, when she said she had not received kind treatment, she carried herself and 10 other people in her master's best 2 coaches and horse teams on a wild ride to freedom. Now, she planned this, we know, even though to try and explain why Black people ran away from slavery, the slave masters concocted a fake disease called drapetomania, the disease of running away, as if somehow we could not recognize the difference between liberty and oppression. But she planned it. She waited until October. She waited until the nights were longer than the days. And then she and her compatriots, her children, two enslaved teens, we don't know the names of the rest, but they were able to get their horses more than 40 miles through dank and dark forests and finally get them into the bosom of freedom. We know as well that there were battles between the slave owners and Black families on the waters of the Chesapeake Bay. And so the top image is called Crossing the Bay in a Bateau. That's a shallow draft boat. And we see the Black family fighting off the slave owners on the Chesapeake Bay. And then we see, in this case, how the risk paid off. We see an arrival from Maryland in 1859. In this case, another woman, Anne Maria Jackson, brought her 7 children to Philadelphia and tasted the sweetness of freedom. After the Civil War, we had the post-emancipation family. And the family life of Blacks, while unrestricted by slavery, was still hedged in by poverty and battered by prejudice and discrimination. But even so, there were greater variety in family types and more chances for the development of strong family ties than before the Civil War. Many Black folk remained with the mates they had married during slavery, and the elders still assumed a very special place in their homes. Sharecropping on Southern plantations, often with an antebellum master. They were illiterate and penniless, but year after year, they recognized that this endless cycle of sharecropping and tenant farming was not the way out. Many began to make their way north, and if they could not make their way north, they looked constantly for better conditions. William Pickens' family moved 20 times in 15 years looking for better conditions. The ethnic dimension in American history reminds us that for 200 years, the Southern economy had relied upon African-American labor. After the Civil War, whites still needed workers. If Blacks managed to gain economic self-sufficiency, they would be free of white control. So whites made sure African-Americans stayed poor. Threats of physical injury kept them from skilled jobs or joining trade unions. Some states even prohibited them from buying land or leasing it on a long-term basis. But most African-American workers ended up as tenant farmers. In the late 19th century, thousands of white workers displaced African-American artisans, especially in such skilled occupations as carpenters, iron workers, railroad workers, coopers, blacksmiths, and tailors. And it was at this time, after the Civil War, that white so-called experts began to announce that there was something fundamentally wrong with the Black family. It was not until several years later that Black experts, Black sociologists, like the indefatigable W.E.B. Du Bois, began to study Black people and begin to bring a measure of understanding and perspective that was missing in many white examinations of the Black family. And they found out that, as in Africa, family were not individuals, they were the building blocks of African society. That family members act as economic and emotional networks. That blood relations in Africa typically constituted wider relations than those characteristic in a Western nuclear family. African children, Black children indeed, as well, were early taught the lessons of maturity and self-discipline and respect for the elders and cooperation. And they were taught to aspire to education. And so we see in studies like the Negro American family or in the Philadelphia Negro, also done under the direction of W.B. Du Bois, that there is a prime ground for a new view of the Black family. But the Black church remained the first institution owned and controlled by the African Americans. It was haven and harbor for the Black family. It was a way to show their talents, and it would be singular in building a hedge around the Black family then and today. There was much to puzzle about. In many cases, a land was taken with the help of the city or state government. Right now, there's a case in LA about how the city stole the Black community of Manhattan Beach, and it's taken a century for these Black people to begin to get their land back. Alabama pushed Black family off its land. And we understand that for people who wanted to keep us, if not in legal slavery, but a neo-slavery, to steal the land, the foundation of the family's wealth, was one way to do it. So many African Americans left the South and went to the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic states, and to the far West, looking for opportunities, not simply to make money for themselves, but to also protect their families. But as we moved into other parts of the South, and we saw that our growing political acumen and strength would pose a threat to the established order. So time after time after time, the racists struck at the roots of the Black family with a particular vigor in terms of breaking it down, making it non-functional, and putting us in Jim Crow societies. Washington, D.C. was a Jim Crow metropolis a century ago. Some would say in many respects it still is. But all throughout the South, you got a chance to see the deleterious effects of racial discrimination. Here in this article from the Crisis magazine, still published today by the NAACP, we get a sense of how, although the law of the land said separate and equal, the only thing that could be called upon was it would be separate, but almost never equal. The white high school in Birmingham, Alabama, had the same population level as the colored high school. But the white high school was worth over $200,000 in terms of the building, grounds, and equipment, while the Black high school was only worth $1,050. Hardly separate and equal. In the 1960s, the Black family was again declared pathological thanks to the work of a man named Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who said that the matriarchal nature of the Black family would lead to its deterioration. He called upon the high number of illegitimate births, as his phrase for children born to unmarried couples, as profound detriment, almost inescapable. But yet the Black family remains. It still thrives and survives. Today, the Black family confronts singular issues in terms of the economy. And we find that Black women are carrying a particularly heavy burden in terms of operating when needed as the strong part of the family. Recently, former First Lady Michelle Obama spoke about experiencing low-grade depression caused by the double pandemic of COVID-19 and racial strife. We need to know that times have never been easy for Black people in this country, but we've had extraordinary sisters who were able to show by word and work that they were more than a match for men, and that their visions coming together in unity would help to save the Black family. If your grandchildren or your children, indeed, if you are unfamiliar with Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, or Fannie Lou Hamer, or Ella Baker, then read up on these extraordinary women and how they helped to save the Black community, how they provided leadership in very difficult times. I mean, even today, the average Black family with children holds just 1 cent of wealth for every dollar that the average white family with children holds. So while our plate is full, the Black family remains able in one way by going back to those extended kinship networks. And if you need an example, I can think of no purer one than the one you're looking at right now. A bond transcending generations. For a girl and her great grandfather or grandmothers, we've seen the grandparents step up as they did in traditional African society, as they do in Black America today. They stand up to fill in the gaps, to provide sterling examples of love and patience, kindness and direction. The Black family is, of course, hampered by social and moral cost of mass incarceration in African American families. But we're finding a way through. And just when it seemed as though households headed by single Black men were on the way to being increased, we hit a hard time. We hit a time where make racism great again seems to be the motto of the day. But again, we find that Black families were stepping up to the plate, that issues like criminal justice reform, we're finally seeing some slow progress on those. The truth is that in many ways, the African American family has been operating on crisis mode for some time now, as we see buffeted by these finances and educational issues. But there is still hope. And even as the recession and COVID-19 have polarized families and seen economic doldrums sweep through our communities, and once again, the society itself has found it as though it did not wish Black families well, we still are here. Even though we're in the bullseye of COVID, even though we see racism on the rise, we can take solace in the fact that young African Americans in the 21st century are continuing the historic traditions of Black protest by using social media to combat such varied issues as campus racism, economic inequality, racial hostility, environmental injustice, police brutality, and sexual assault. In other words, these great battlers for freedom have handed the task on to a new generation, and there is a new birth of struggle. You know, it may be useful to recall that the late Dorothy Height, the civil rights leader, predicted that the Black family of the future will foster our liberation, enhance our self-esteem, and share our ideals and goals. Perhaps some of the rest of us might understand that the way we begin to make change is to insist on better educational forums, that we cannot still have books that slight the achievements of Black men and women and feel that our children are fully educated, that in fact, America must change. And this is what this new generation is working in behalf of. We have to celebrate the strengths of the African American families. And African American and Euro American families have historically met the instrumental and expressive needs of their families differently. Most Euro-American families are a unit in which all or most of the functions and activities of family life are carried out in isolation from other kin. However, the Black family unit exists within the extended family, and such functions and activities are shared by both. Whereas Euro-American families are more compatible with individualism and materialism, African-American families show an interdependence or communal cooperation born out of the necessity of providing a living. So in conclusion, what I can say, and what I reflect upon is a Bible verse from 2 Corinthians 4, 8 and 9. When I think about the Black family, I am reminded that Paul wrote, "We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." And so, to the amazement of many onlookers, considering the burdens that we have faced and face today, the 9.95 million African American families of the current generation still make their way. They still exist. And we can still take pride in the heritage of strength and faith that they have given us. Thank you very much.